Yeah. Very good. No, everyone's looking great. I feel. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, it's been a bit of a mad rush. Just Cool, thanks everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Long-Term Plan Annual Plan Subcommittee. And just noting the emergency procedures on the screen. Please make sure your phone is on silent. We'll go to our opening karakia. Whakatakata hau ki te uru, whakatakata hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, he hiaki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei mauri ora. Apologies, I've received no apologies. Councillor, do we know? Yeah. So has he put an apology in? Okay, so no, we'll no, Councillor Tupou's apology. And do I have this for lateness? Do I have a seconder? Deputy Mayor Lewis, any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Public comment. Do we have one member of the public who wishes to speak? Kaz, welcome. This is on Betoni parking.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Kaz Tokonga, although many of you should know that by now. Nice to see you, Mayor and Councillors. Good to see you're all quite alive still after 2 days. Yes, I'm here to talk about Betoni parking, and if you had told me I was going to do that in my own right 10 years ago, I probably would have laughed in your face. But here we are. As we all know, the whole paid parking kōrero around Betoni has been quite a interesting sort of dialogue, and it has raised a number of different issues. And I stressed to Catherine that I'm coming to speak as an individual because naturally, as someone who's been quite active in the community, as someone who is constantly, and I say constantly, thinking about climate issues, and also thinking about the future of not just Petone, but also our city and the way that we do things as city leaders. And I actually think there is something to be said about the process that we go about things. What is heartening to me in terms of being able to see different options than what was just in the consultation is more information, but also a sense that some concerns have been raised by what has been heard and some thought has gone into, oh, what else could we do to maybe suggest some alternatives? And I think it's been great to see that Council's been listening to some extent. But I think there's some bigger questions if we step back a few moments and actually consider what is it that we are actually trying to achieve? So a number of times people were asked, so what is this actually about? And a number of times the response was about revenue. And I look at the times of this as someone who also works in Betoni on Jackson Street, and I look at that and I go, oh, that's actually not at the busiest times. And then I also think about that in the sense of when is it that people come from, say, out of the Hutt Valley into Betoni? And so I think there are some questions around what is it that you are actually trying to achieve, and for council to move beyond just being reactive or responsive, but to actually start thinking proactively about what is it that we're trying to do to help people actually consider, for instance, is it about a more equitable thing around pay-as-you-user pays, for instance, or the climate implications of that as well? Because I tell you, and most of you will probably know this, or probably avoid it, because Saturday is one of the busiest days, and it's when a lot of people from out of town come in. So there are some things that I think you need to consider in terms of a more proactive lens. And I don't think that's just necessarily about parking, but I think that there is a lot to be said about making sure you do not make a decision in haste that not only impacts how you as a council and how future councils move forward, but also how it impacts the community, business, residents, and people from abroad. And that's mainly just what I wanted to say. Kia ora.
Thanks, Kaz. Any questions? Councillor Mitchell.
Just speaking directly to the options that have been put in front of us, including the original proposal and some alternate options in front of us today, what do you think is the best approach for us as a council? acknowledging that this discussion did start around revenue. It was about shifting, diversifying our revenue sources and shifting everything off being rates funded into a more user pays model. With the options that have been presented, including the alternate ones today, what do you think is the best solution?
So I think in terms of the best solution, I think, again, this is where I think council needs to be proactive in thinking, what does it want to achieve, say, in 5-10 years' time? If your idea around parking in the terms of the city moving forward is around user pays in essence, I think you need to be thinking, okay, well, if we want to get there in, say, 10 years' time and make sure that we're at that point, what are some of the, let's go from here and then think years back. And I think with Petone, even within the consultation period itself, I think I've actually shifted a bit in terms of understanding a bit more about the ecosystem of parking in Petone, which is actually very different to many other parts of the city. And it was from listening to community people that made me go, oh, actually, you've got a point that I never thought about. And note, I'm not someone who drives. I'm not impacted by the paid parking thing either way. But I am mindful of the people who will suffer the most in terms of some of the implications if it's dropped heavy and hard. And so there's a lot to be said about leadership in terms of the city of helping people journey in that place to get it to, this is what we're trying to achieve. But at this stage, I also think that council hasn't been able to say, this is what we're trying to do with the whole parking thing, including in Petone. And so I guess for me, I'm like, if this is about revenue, there needs to be a conversation about when's going to be the most effective time to be charging people and who are we necessarily charging. And I think for me, that's also about equity around it makes sense to be charging the people who are currently not paying for that, who are coming from out of town, for instance. And so if we look at some of the busiest times on Jackson Street, sure, you'll get the busy, say, retail hive from, say, 10 to 4, which is when most shops are open throughout the week. And then you hit this dinner time, which is like 5 to 9, where it's super busy and often the busiest. And so there's those sort of dynamics where that's excluded completely in terms of that dinner time dynamic. Some of you will know this, I did a personal poll on my own page around paid parking because I knew that I had Petone residents, Lower Hutt residents, people from the Greater Wellington region who love Petone and still come to it, as well as people beyond that who said if they travelled here, they actually expect parking to some extent, like paid parking to some extent as well. And so I had quite a range of views. And for me, that was around understanding what the actual impacts would be to each different group, because when we do something like paid parking in any space and place, obviously it doesn't just impact residents, but it does impact them in a different way. Sorry, that was a very long-winded answer.
Okay, thank you very much.
Kia ora. Thank you.
Okay. Moving through to conflict of interest declarations. Any conflicts to declare? No. Item 5, which is recommendations to council. First up is item A, which is the analysis of submissions on page 2 of the supplementary agenda. Richard, if you'd like to come forward. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Kia ora koutou. So the analysis of submissions presents just the full results from the survey and engagement process that we did. I briefed you just ahead of the hearings at a very high level, and you'll now have had a chance to see the more detailed analysis and then also put that in the context of the hearings. Just acknowledging that the analysis does include submissions from the Have Your Say page and from some of the from the letters that we received, and that and that the overall results are quite they're quite divided in a number of ways, but some of the thematic analysis work, some of the comments and stuff will help provide context around that. So happy to take any questions about the process, but more detail will be provided in terms of the impact of these results when we make those financial decisions.
Thank you. Any questions first off on the process which the team have taken in preparing this information? No? Anything on the substantive report? Councillor Dyer?
Now looking back at the questions around the Petone assets, do you think it was a good decision to lump those three projects together. Just looking at the sort of responses, it's without reading every single submission line by line, it's quite hard to get a sense as to where the public's sitting on each of the individual parts of the project.
I'll hand over to Jared for a more detailed response, but just to say that what is clear is that if we hadn't brought them all together, then I think people could have got quite confused in terms of the overall picture that we're painting for the city itself, and just focused in on Petone. But Jared might want to provide a view.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, in terms of the approach to the Petone assets in the consultation document, we'd just note that that was at the direction of elected members at the time. So officers suggested an approach which was different initially, and in response to feedback early on, we structured that in a way that reflected the envelope of funding and at the direction of elected members at that stage.
Okay, any other questions? No? Okay, thank you, Richard. Appreciate it. Okay, I'll move the recommendations 1 through to 5, which are all noting recommendations for this paper. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Briggs, any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Moving through to item 5B, which is progressing decisions on the final long-term plan, page 7 of your main agenda. And I'll ask Jenny to speak to this item, who has a presentation for us as well. Thanks.
Kia ora, good morning, everybody. Okay, so I'm going to take you through a brief presentation. We've got some really important decisions and direction that we're seeking from Council today. And so the presentation is really trying to give you a high-level overview of this big set of agenda papers today and get you across where we're going for the day. Okay, so we've got a high-level timeline in that first slide, just summarising the long journey that we've been on through this LTP process. It's taken us a whole year to get here, many council decision points along the way. The most recent council decision point was back on the 27th of March, where council adopted the consultation document and the underlying information, and that was off the back of an external audit process. We've had a month of consultation, and the last 2 days we've listened to all the hearings. So the purpose of today's meeting, we're really looking for direction and some initial decisions as we head into the final meeting on the 4th of June for the LTP. So that's the final meeting where we make all the decisions, and then on the 27th of June, Council adopts the final LTP and sets the rates for the year. We've also got to get through an external audit process through June, so it's going to be a tight month. You're all very well aware of our very challenging financial context that we've been operating in. High inflation, borrowing costs, it's been really, really challenging for us. We've been trying to work through figuring out a balance of how much investment we put into the plan, aging assets to deal with, thinking about financial sustainability, rates affordability for our community, and really trying to prioritise very, very carefully and carefully consider what we ask our community to pay for. We've also had Standard & Poor's tell us that our credit rating is at risk. Basically, in August last year, the AA stable outlook was revised from a stable to a negative outlook. So we are at risk with the high level of debt that we're projecting in our plan, that potentially our credit rating is going to be moving downwards. So just briefly going through the consultation results on the key items related to finance aspects. And obviously the paper's got a whole lot of information in there for you. So the big items we consulted on, the water services. So the preferred option, that $1.6 billion of investment. We've got 66% of people basically supporting that preferred option, although there was some opposition to water meters, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later today. In terms of FOGO, we had the preferred option of implementing the new food and waste organics proposal. Basically, we had 39% saying they preferred that option, whilst the majority not including that option, 55% said they did not support it. In terms of rates relief for low-income households, so that was the rates rebate top-up proposal, we had 60% of people supporting that proposed option. And then Petone assets, as we've seen, there's been lots of mixed views, and we've got some tough calls to make around the Petone Wharf, Petone Grandstand, and the library decisions on those. Okay, so briefly, across fees and charges, we had 38% people agreeing or strongly agreeing in support of those fees and charges, and 40% disagreeing or strongly disagreeing. And we've seen the Petone parking being a key area of focus and feedback. And we've also heard generally across increasing fees and charges that the feedback's been council needs to reduce its spending and really focus on core services. In terms of the financial strategy, mixed views here as well, 34% agree or strongly agree, and 35% disagree or strongly disagree. In terms of the rates increase, the proposed 16.9%, so 32% agree or strongly agree, and 54% disagree or strongly disagree. And we had a range of feedback in terms of potential ways that council could reduce spending. And then the final question around the general direction of the 10-year plan, so that overall big picture approach, 43% agree or strongly agree, and 35% disagree or strongly disagree. Okay, so just jumping across now to all the decisions that we've got on the table and direction that we're seeking today. So you've obviously got the big consultation items, development contributions. We've got Dwayne online, and he's going to join us for the DC policy piece. We've got parking fees, some options for you to consider. We've got a proposed initiative to improve equity in access to aquatic services. There's a separate report on that. Huia pool refurbishment and decarbonisation, separate report. We've got in the public excluded section some information around the savings for community hubs and libraries. And then we've also got some savings for transport proposed. And then there's quite a long list of timing changes, carryovers of some budgets. So a lot to get through today. At the end of the meeting yesterday, you did ask for some information on parking fees, so I've popped that slide in there. And just quickly to mention that if we were to pull out Petone parking revenue completely, so to not implement those parking charges, basically it would be a reduction in revenue of 900,000. Ideally, we'd like to see something else to offset that, so some other budgets coming in, to offset that. Or alternatively, it would be a rates impact of 0.6% for 24-25. And just a reminder also, one of the key reasons why we proposed this parking fee change was to fund all the massive big changes we saw from the procurement processes for our transport contracts. Okay, so we've tried to anticipate where all your decisions are going to land, and we've done some financial projections. So it's included in the agenda papers. Just to quickly whip through and explain what's in and out in terms of those financial projections. So in terms of the big items, the big key consultation items, we haven't changed any of those compared to what was in the draft LTP. For development contributions, we've taken out $21 million of revenue, assuming that you go with all the proposed project changes. So that's taking Riverlink and subdivision improvement works, etc., out of the DC charging for developers. We haven't assumed any changes to the transition over 3 years for the implementation of other charges. So, and we also haven't included any in the community housing provider changes. We've adjusted the budgets for any unavoidable changes. We've adjusted for the higher interest costs on debt. We've put in the bulk water levy changes from Greater Wellington Regional Council, and so on. In terms of budget savings, we've kept the $35 million that we had in the draft LTP maintained. We've also added in another $3.9 million, and there's information about that in the report, such as transport activity savings as well as resource consent fee changes. We've adjusted for all the budget carryovers. We haven't taken out any parking revenue. And so off the back of all of those initial sort of directions, we've basically adjusted the rates increase from 28 to 2030, slightly adjusted it, and the main driver there is around that DC revenue. So the year one rates are staying the same at this point in time, and then we've had to adjust the rates later on to slightly higher levels. Okay, so off the back of those assumptions around rates increases, just quickly, the capital investment program, $2.6 billion, 62% of that relates to water services and 21% transport. And you can see in that graph there, real heavy dominance of orange, that's all the Three Waters investment, and transport is the green. We're still going to come back on the 4th of June. We've got some further advice coming back on Riverlink, budget changes related to that. We've got Infrastructure Acceleration Fund, some phasing changes, and also Wellington Water are going to be providing their latest final set of advice for us before we complete the LTP. And as we understand at this stage, that advice is not any extra budget, it's some rephasing with bringing some things forward slightly. So they've done a bit of reprioritisation within budgets. The debt profile off the back of all those assumptions, we're basically, that debt's peaking up over $1 billion in 2029. You can see in the graph there, the orange is the projected debt level, and that yellow line right at the top is that debt limit. So we're really, really close to our debt limit, and the headroom capacity there in the period 2027 to 2030, really tight, down to $120 million. You can also see, compared to the annual plan, the black line is the annual plan, last annual plan, and you can see that our debt levels have pushed up another $200 million compared to what we had in the annual plan. So those Standard & Poor's credit rating risks are definitely dialed up even further. In terms of the balanced operating budget projection, so you can see it there, pretty similar, because we've adjusted the rates increases, pretty similar position to what we had in the draft LTP. I just want to highlight that in 24-25, we're sitting at a $40 million deficit that we're running. And then just going back to the rates increase, so for 24-25, the first year, so we have done some updates to our modelling, reflecting all the latest changes to our rating database. There's obviously been some demolitions, there's been some new builds, etc. The average residential ratepayer, the impact is pretty similar to what we had in the draft LTP, so sitting at $10.81 per week and 16.8% increase. Average commercial central has gone up slightly, the growth there, and obviously there's been some demolitions. So that's gone up slightly, and it's sitting at $69.76 per week or 18.7%, and so on. So I won't go through all of those. Okay, so just to wrap up, this is a meeting to set direction. Tell us what you need for the meeting on the 4th of June when we finalise all those decisions. There's a list there on the slide of the things that we are preparing papers for and that we've heard from the hearings, like micromobility program, the Wellington Water, Riverlink, and so on. But we're very keen to hear what else you need for the 4th of June. Thank you.
Thanks. Any questions of Jenny at this point? Probably helpful that I just run through how we will work through the meeting, just so we're all on the same page. So we have a number of reports which relate to content within this particular report. So what we'll do is we'll just pause this one for a moment as we work through those different reports. And then within 5B, we will also give any further direction on matters which have come through the consultation process, and where we feel as if we're in a position to be able to give some strong direction. So I think there are, in my mind, a number of things where we can do that post our submissions, and I think being able to soak that in and consider it. But there are other things which I'd certainly be looking for us to seek further information on. And noting on that, final decisions would be made on the 4th of June. But if we make a clear direction here today on something, don't expect that to be re-litigated at the 4th of June. So we don't want to do that unless, of course, new information comes to light or the likes. So, okay, Councillor Morgan.
Kia ora, Chair. Just asking in respect to process, if I was wanting to move a motion, could I signal that to you now in this space?
Yeah,
or?
I think what we should do is work through the reports, then we can address anything else once we've dealt with all of that. Yep. So certainly, if there is particular things that you would like to put forward, like today is really the opportunity to do that. So I don't want anyone to feel like they've missed today, but I'll make sure I prompt that. But just make sure you've written it down. Okay. Okay, cool. What we'll do then is in accordance with Standing Order 10.4, I will call precedence to items 5C, 5D, 5E, 5F so we will work through them. Do I have a second to Councillor Briggs? All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Okay, so first up we will deal with 5C, which is the development fee contributions policy, and this is on page 177 of your agenda. So we do have Dwayne Fletcher on Zoom, who will give a presentation, and we've got Deepu here as well to support answering any questions. So Dwayne, over to you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, councillors. Just want to do a sound check. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. I'll just share a presentation, if I may, Mr. Mayor. Right, I'm hoping now that you can see the development contributions presentation.
Yes, it has gone down to like a smaller screen. You might want to.
We can see the same as you see instead of the actual presentation, Dwayne. You're in presenter mode.
Right. A moment. Oh, sorry, one moment. I just need to go into the... Right. Oh, is that a better view?
That's fine if you're happy. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we just want to run through a quick presentation, just walking through some of the key elements of the development contributions policy that I think need to bring to your attention, as well as provide some advice on some of the points that have come up in submissions. So just a quick recap, the two kind of bigger changes that were proposed in this version of the development contributions policy was the introduction of a category for 4-bedroom and more dwellings. You currently have 1, 2, and 3 and everything above categories, and we recommended introducing a 4. It helps balance out the funding for development contributions, and for the same reason you have a 1, 2 reduction is the same reason for having a 4+ category, essentially related to demand. The other main change, and probably more significant in the scheme of things, is we've included your new program, your new growth program in the calculations under the starting principle that growth pays for growth, and that has significantly increased the charges, particularly pretty much across the board, but particularly for the Valley Floor and a little bit for Wainui-a-Mata as well. So those were the two big changes that went out. A lot of the policy itself was largely the same as your previous iteration. In terms of asking submitters whether they agreed or disagreed with the policy, you'll see there that there was a lot of support and ambivalence towards the policy. There was neither agree nor disagree was the largest category, and slightly more people agreed with it than disagreed with it, something in the order of 30% versus 20%. So that's a very high level summary of the feedback we got through the submissions. In terms of some of the changes that have occurred since that draft went out, we went through a review with the transport team and also Wellington Water, and there were we're recommending a number of changes actually to the way some of the projects are treated in the development contributions policy. And in the policy version that you have attached to this agenda, it includes all of these changes, just to be clear. The IF Stormwater project had an assessment rate for growth of 27%, and we're recommending that come down to 18%. Essentially, the IF application suggested 18% should be the rate applied to that project. It had 2 figures in the recommendations. I actually did the memo. 18% is definitely the more defensible one. The other change with that project and the IF wastewater project is in the fog of LTP, I received information. I didn't realize it was already inflated, and the model inflates it again. So we've de-inflated the project costs. They are inflated, but they were inflated twice. So now that reduces the growth project costs that were in the model. I've also suggested taking out some transportation projects, primarily on the basis of funding uncertainty and deliverability for now. And there is a coding error with the Eastern Reservoir projects. There are two parts to it, and the costs were included against the wrong lines. The net change of that fixing that coding error is a reduction collectively between those two projects in the DC charges. And the other one is Wellington Water provided updated information on Black Creek. They have recommended we only consider part of the project as growth related, and updated the percentage they think relates to growth as a consequence of rise it from 30% to 37%. I know you would have received a lot of feedback about the charges and how high they are. So we thought we'd provide some information to you about how they kind of relate. And you'll see the revised charges as recommended in this report are included on the far right there. I guess two things to bear in mind. Of the councils that we sampled, the average of the highest charges that those councils charge was around $53,000. With the revised charges, all of your catchments are below the average highest charge, DC charge for Three Waters and Transport for the ones we sampled. The average lowest charge was around just over $20,000. And you'll note that most of your catchments, Eastbourne, Stokes Valley, Western Hills, are in fact below that lowest average. So the changes we've made hopefully give you some comfort that you're definitely not an outlier in the sector. However, it's probably worth pointing out within the Wellington region, the Hutt City proposed charges are at the higher end. And you can see in the presentation there some of the other ones. For Kapiti, Porirua, Upper Hutt, Wellington, the only thing to mention is Porirua has not updated their DC policy yet. They will do so later this year. In terms of the revenue, it's still a net good story. You know, in the previous development contributions policy, you were looking at something like recouping $45 million in revenue through development contributions. That did bump up to 146 with the draft went out for consultation. With the project changes that we've recommended, that comes down to 124, which is still a lot more than the revenue forecasts previously. There's been some adjustment to this to make, to reflect the fact that it takes a while for the development contributions to really start hitting new developments, and that's why it climbs up. In terms of some of that key infrastructure, there's just a slide here that just reminds you of that. And there's some very substantial works here. The combined Eastern Hills Reservoir and Pipeline is around $87 million. You've got the Wainui-Mara Reservoir, $50 million, which is half funded from development contributions. You've got the IAF projects, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And the wastewater one there is entirely funded from development contributions. You've got some very significant, I'm going to jump down the list a little bit, very significant upgrades programmed for the Seaview wastewater treatment plant. And you've got some retic going up and down the valley floor as well, including a big project, Petone, that's a joint venture with Upper Hutt. And the Seaview treatment plant projects alone, roughly a quarter of that is recovered over the next 10 years is recovered from growth. And that the reason I mentioned that one in particular is it's a very significant part of the district-wide wastewater charge. And you've got some other projects you're probably familiar with, like the Cross Valley Connections and Cycleway program, that have a lower amount recovered from DCs, and the amounts here you're seeing are actually assuming that you get NZTA subsidy. So the growth component is roughly double these. In terms of those higher charges, we've heard the concerns from some of your submitters, and I'm sure your council is aware that Development General has taken a downturn in about the last 6 months. So we've outlined some options for you to consider transitioning the new development contributions charges, and this is essentially the same table that's in the report. One of the options, of course, is not to transition and have the full charges come in from 1 July. In short, we're recommending that you provide some relief in the order of 20% for your highest catchment, that's the valley floor, for a year. That gives you the opportunity, that provides some relief. It brings it down to actually less than I think the Wainoia charge. And it gives you the opportunity to review that and see how development's progressing to see whether you want to extend it without locking it in for many years to come. In all of these options, should you choose to go down and transition, it's capital funding that development contributions contributes to. So you would need to fund the difference, the cost and loss in revenue through a loan, which would be funded through rates. And so the report provides information around the debt impact associated with the various transition options. And the one that's recommended by staff, the estimated loss is under $1 million in year one, 700,000 roughly, and that would need to be picked up in additional debt funded from rates. Here are the revised charges. There's the base revised charge is the one that's in a black circle there, and that's including the project changes that we referred to before. So you can see the valley floor inclusive of GST would be just under $45,000. You can also see what the year one charges would be with the different transition options, 1 through to 3 outlined in the report. And so the one recommended by staff would see a charge of $35,000, roughly $36,000, including GST, start from 1 July for the valley floor. All of the rest are as they are with the revised projects. There's no changes recommended to them. The other thing is you've received a number of submissions suggesting that community housing providers should have a remission. And you'll see the report suggests an approach, a two-tiered approach to that. One is an automatic remission of 40%, so they'd pay 60%, and a further remission reduction if they meet certain criteria associated with the council's wider strategic goals. We also reviewed how these are treated in several other councils, and it's probably worth pointing out it's not universal. Not all councils provide remissions for community housing providers, but several do. One of the notable features that those policies had is the more significant remissions were associated with the fund to offset it. So that the policies didn't say, well, we'll remit it for the community housing providers and somehow we'll fold that cost into the future charges that other developers have to pay, which is not really consistent with the legislation. So we're recommending, if you go down this path, that you establish a fund funded from rates that basically pays for those remissions. There's been feedback prior to the report, the policy being adopted, and in some of the submissions, talking about various justifications for discounts or emissions, either because people put in tanks or put in wastewater pump stations, or it's because of apartments. And we just wanted to remind you that there are demand-based reductions where people's development, an individual development, departs materially from the assumed demand a development will generate on the networks. So that's in place now. And so if someone comes in and it really is radically different, 6-star rated water conservation commercial building, for example, they would likely be assessed on their merits rather than applying the policy strictly. There's also a general provision around around remissions in general, but there's an underlying principle of if it avoids costs for the council, you know, that's a ground for remission, and actually it's already a ground for remission under the legislation in any case, but it's that avoid cost principle. And we've suggested remissions to support the principle set out in the Tūtera Whenua Māori Act, and very much in line with your rates remission approach to the same obligation. In terms of today, we're suggesting you approve all the projects as changed. It effectively is probably the only course you can take. Leaving them as they were, especially for the Three Waters one, is probably not defensible anymore now that we have new information. We're seeking your guidance on which transition option, if any, you wish to take up for the charges. and direction on the remission for the registered community housing providers. One thing I neglected to mention back there about the community housing providers is we absolutely recommend that you require as a qualification for that remission, should you go down that path, registration as a CHIP. This isn't just a way of creating a barrier for people to get the remission. It comes with certain assurance that council can take comfort in, that the community housing provider is long-term financially sustainable, has good tenant management, good governance, and a range of other things that comes with that registration. So it's a good thing to require, and you get the outcomes you're seeking. You can be more assured you're going to get the outcomes you're seeking from any community housing provider reduction. One of the things we want you to consider is a clawback clause. Christchurch City Council have this, and they are unique as far as I can tell on doing it, but it feels like a very good idea to avoid gaming and arbitrage, where the remission is recorded on the title of the properties, and should the properties no longer be used for community housing, there's an obligation on the owner to pay back the remission. I think in some of the information provided to you the other day, it might have suggested something like 5 to 10 years. You know, you putting a limit on that clawback, which probably seems reasonable. After a period of time, no one is going to know. And I guess looking for some indication about what you think is a reasonable time frame. From my perspective, something like 10 to 30 years is probably not unreasonable. The other thing is and it's not in the report, is we actually recommend that you consider updates to the assessment rates for retirement villages. The Somerset put in a submission. It's supported by an Inside Economics report. And for the most part, I agree with the conclusions in that submission. Probably the one place I disagree with is around the transport assessment rates, and I wouldn't be recommending the ones that Somerset recommended in their submission. Not going into a lot of detail, but it's all about how the assessment rates are applied. They've suggested, I think, 0.1 EHUs and 0.2, but 0.1 for rooms and 0.2 for village units. I would be suggesting if you go down that route, you actually have 0.2 EHUs for rooms and 0.4 for retirement village units, which is actually an increase on the 0.3 that we have at the moment, which is an average for both. I can explain that if necessary, but I think that's justified. The other thing that's not picked up in the report is Somerset have requested that council stage the timing of payments for their development contributions. So retirement village usually gets a land use consent up front, and then they get a series of building consents as they roll stages of their retirement village out. And they're actually saying, can you treat us like you do subdivision? The subdivision is assessed when the consent for subdivision comes in, but they pay in stages as different stages in the development proceed. And they're essentially saying, can we do the same thing, but treat our building consents as the stages? And I think that's a very fair request and treats them in a similar way to a subdivision. So I would be recommending that. The other thing we're seeking guidance from you on is around the 4 or more bedroom-based assessments. My recommendation is to progress with it. It helps balance your demand, but bedroom-based demand system. But there were a lot of people who raised submissions on it, concerned that it would discourage significantly this kind of development, and I guess the word was penalise intergenerational living. Thank you, Council.
Thank you, Dwayne, for that very comprehensive presentation on the issues in front of us. I'm going to just suggest we stay on that screen, that final screen, because I think that's
apologies.
A good
bring it back up.
Okay. A good help for councillors as we go through some of the matters. But in the meantime, can we open it up for questions? Councillor Stellinger, then Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Dwayne. Just had one main question. That's really, is there any allowance for the impact that the development contributions might have on the rate of development and growth in the city, or in all the options, are we assuming the same level of development and it's unaffected by our charges?
You through the chair, Councillor Stellinger, it assumes it's largely unaffected by the rate of charges. And I think that's probably a reasonable assumption long term for the 10 years. I don't feel qualified to tell you, and we haven't yet got an economist, an urban economist, to run the numbers or anything like that. That tells you what impact might be in the short run.
Councillor Edwards, then Councillor Parkin.
Yeah, could I get some advice on this question of subdivision road improvements? It tells us that there's uncertainty on the far right from Waka Kotahi, and it says we should leave it till we get that certainty in the next review. Because this is, for me, a classic case of growth should be paying for growth. And we really want to do something about it because there's some very big bills coming to us from subdivision and the downside effects on our streets. So do we have to wait for the National Land Transport Plan, John, before we get that? And if not, when are we next going to have a DC review?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor. I think it's unlikely that's going to get funding from Waka Kotahi through the NLTP. It is quite a way down the priority list. So that's the fund that was put in for retrospective changes. So we've had all of the developments on in some cases, some narrow streets and the impacts of those because for various reasons, over the last couple of years. So, but retrospectively going back and having a look at the traffic and roading impacts. So do we need to put in dented parking in there? Maybe just as minor as broken yellow lines or potentially shifting power poles and widening footpaths. So then there's still around 100 streets that are on that list that need some sort of assessment. So that's what that is for. But my gut feel is that we won't get funding based on the draft government policy statement on transport. So,
Councillor Parkin, then Councillor Mitchell.
Kia ora, thank you for the report. Just wondering whether or not we've had any analysis on unintended consequences, i.e. development happening in places that we don't want. Councillor Stallinger has already mentioned about the development getting moved out of the city, but I'm also concerned that it could potentially shift development to other parts of the city that we want the growth happening in the central city to happen from the transport and climate reduction points of view. Yeah.
I'm happy to answer that, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, the answer is no analysis, but I would probably infer some things from the differences in the charges and how material that is in terms of development choices for individuals. The difference in the charges is kind of a maximum of $30,000. It's actually a little less than that, and in the scheme of your average house price, that's less than 4 or 5% of your average house price, and it's actually less in some cases. So I just question whether that would be the determinant of where people choose to undertake development and live, or whether it's much more in what other drivers such as location, proximity, amenity, and things like that are going to be more influential. But to answer your question, no formal analysis.
Councillor Mitchell, then. Okay, you got it. Councillor Brown, then Councillor Dyer.
Yeah, just a question on the chips. That is an arrangement that there's the developer, the arrangement's made with the chip prior, and if anything breaks down after that, it's a clawback with the chip and that they be registered. Is that for whole chip developments? We're not considering part chip, mixed model, if developers come to us with a mixed model option?
Yeah, through the chair. Look, if a development was part community housing provider provided and the other one was purely commercial, then I think your team would view it in its two parts and apply the rules appropriately.
And just a follow-up question, will we have this bracketed that we may have to adapt if there's changes at central government on their social housing and public housing structure?
Potentially there might be changes in the way they view community housing providers. This policy would specifically preclude kāinga ora. I'm not sure if I mentioned that, if I failed to mention it. Kāinga ora isn't a chip anyway, but you know, that would be one area where I'd suggest you don't provide a remission. So any change in how kāinga operates wouldn't affect this.
And if I may add, you know, this is a new policy in terms of the remission for chips. So, and we've in, you know, new period with the new government. So council could choose to review it earlier, you know, in a year's time or something when we've got better clarity.
Yeah, I think we'd certainly put that on our radar. Yeah. Okay, Councillor Dyer and Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you, Dwayne, for your presentation. My question's also on the chips. Would this extend to iwi and Urban Plus that are doing developments on behalf of chips?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. To the extent that any developer, not just Urban Plus, acts as an agent for a chip, you know, it's pretty clear who the owner is. And we've already talked to Tim, and we have a like mind that you would look through the arrangement and you would see the owner, not the agent, as the applicant, and provide the remission appropriately. It's a little more complicated if a developer wants to, if effectively a chip wants to buy a turnkey property from a developer. So the developer is the landowner and genuinely the building consent applicant, not just the agent. And the reason I think you would need to view that differently, and if you wanted to go down this path, be very careful, is because one of the things what you'd want to evidence is that there's a sale and purchase contract between the developer and the chip. Now, there have been lots of instances where sale and purchase agreements fall through. You would have lost your potential opportunity to charge for donut contributions, and it ultimately doesn't end up as a community housing house. The way I would recommend dealing that, if you wanted to extend it that far, and I think you should be cautious in doing so, is actually make the remission retrospective. In that instance, where a developer, not the chip, undertakes the development, it is owned by them, and they pass on the dwelling once it is titled and built to the chip, then apply, and it goes into the ownership of the chip, then apply the remission retrospectively. I would be very cautious about trying to offer a chip remission on a property that is not undertaken by a chip, by a developer, and it's not owned by the chip. And I think you can see the gaming opportunities that would present itself.
Yeah, just thinking of sort of our circumstances here, that's traditionally how Urban Plus does our developments. They develop it as a turnkey and then hand it over to the chip. If we did have that clawback period in there, like there's a development right now that Urban Plus was doing for a chip. The chip's saying we can't buy it, and they're now looking at selling it on the open market to private developers. If we had that clawback in there, would that not mean that as soon as they start selling it privately, they've now got to pay that development contribution, or is it not that simple?
That is a good question, and I would honestly need to think through it.
If I can help, if we take the housing at Taita, where the whole model was based on Urban Plus building and handing over turnkey housing, because that's to the chip, then this policy does not preclude that. That would still continue. If you had a situation where the turnkey went to the chip who said, well, actually, I'm going to sell this on the open market at market price, then the clawback would apply. So it's not going to prevent the innovative ways in which you've worked with Urban Plus, and I'm pretty confident from the experience we've had here and elsewhere that we can make this work to give effect to your intentions, which is clearly to support housing, non-market housing that chips provide, rather than the market rent, which some chips do to subsidise other housing.
Yeah, I fully understand the chip on selling it, that's easy, but I think, if I'm not mistaken, Dwayne is saying that the Taita example wouldn't be excluded in this policy because we did as a turnkey development and handed it over to the CHIP.
Yeah, through
I'm
the chair,
saying that-
I think it's possible. Yep.
I'm saying that the Taita development would qualify. I'm very clear in this policy that the Taita development would qualify for that.
Cool, awesome. You mentioned a few things there about the Somerset submission and changing those and staging the timing as sort of recommendations. Are they, obviously they're not decisions in front of us today, are they recommendations that you're suggesting we make to the DC policy, or are they already being made and we're just not approving them today? Because I agree with both, it should be in there.
Yeah, through the chair, there is, I forwarded through some additional recommended resolutions to deal with the assessment rates. I'm not sure if they've been forwarded to your secretariat team, effectively outlining that you agree to change the assessment rates for retirement rooms and units. In terms of the recommendation around the changing the timing of payment, it doesn't really affect the money you get. You could put a resolution up today, but I guess if you're comfortable with it, we would just reflect that in the policy we present for final adoption.
Okay, cool, thank you. I've just got two more if that's okay. Is it quite common for councils to spread the impacts of DC changes over a period of time?
No, not that common. I think I should also mention that not all councils always charge 100% of development, the growth cost of development contributions, although that is definitely the most common approach. And some councils obviously don't have DCs. I think what is, I guess, if I was to characterise as slightly unique, is the extent of the increase and the timing of the increase makes a slightly unusual circumstances.
Cool. And there's going to be no sort of lag of decision now that in 3 years' time, because we've taken the staged approach, it's going to mean effectively year 4 from now is going to be even bigger because of the decisions we're making now if we were to stage them. But that's what would happen with rates. My gut feeling is it doesn't quite happen like that with DCs, but keen to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, through the chair. So the recommended option, which is a 20% reduction in year 1, that has been costed at effectively $0.7 million, which would go into your debt. It would not affect the charges from year 2 onwards. They would be as they are would otherwise be. And when you revise your long-term plan in 2027, you would need to look at your program at that point and decide whether any further charges increases are required. It's basically based on your program.
Cool. And one more, if I could. Obviously, this is an important policy. You do have a couple of paragraphs in there regarding the reduction in demand when developers have put in mitigation, and a few of the submissions, particularly James Beeben from Urban Edge, talked about sort of discounting for on-site mitigation. There's a few paragraphs in the paper, 37 through to 41, that touch on that. And you did talk about in your presentation about developments being assessed on their merits. James did suggest that was quite strong for commercial, but for residential it was a bit wishy-washy to work out how that sort of assessment on merits would be taken into account. Just wondering if you had any comment on his thoughts.
It probably is more relevant for commercial developments. The law allows you to average. So it's not that there is a difference, it's that there's a material difference between what we've assumed in the policy and the actual nature of the development. It doesn't preclude it. If someone did a bunch of tiny homes, for example, and had utterly unique stormwater management, you would consider that on its merits, I believe. I think the thing I need to point out is that when people put in their stormwater detention, and I use detention, not retention, they don't decrease the discharge from their property. All it does is manage the timing. The same amount of runoff comes off the property. And they also receive the same benefit from flood protection and being able to get around the district as anybody else. And from a wastewater pressure pump situation, it's the same. There's no less discharge from the property from wastewater. It's just the way it enters the system is different. So, there's often the commentary around this has said, less impact or lower demand or demands on the network or less flow. That is, for neither of those, that's true. They have the same runoff or the same discharge into the systems as as uncontrolled developments.
Cool. I understand that for the two examples you've just talked about, but what about wastewater detention tanks that are releasing at 2 a.m. in the morning? Like I was on a resource consent hearing recently, 50 dwellings, they had to spend hundreds of thousands on
I feel like we can't get into this level of detail here today, I think. Because
we had 3 strong submissions.
Yeah, but we're not making decisions on those. We did say that those matters would be referred to a wider policy discussion, because we're not going to make policy on the hoof.
And there's definitely some parts like the reduction for the rainwater and 60%, that stuff I definitely think is quite detailed, but happy to leave this one as part of that bigger review, but it's something that 3 strong submissions did
we're
raise.
all aware of the submissions, and like we said, we can tackle that at a future point, but we need to just stick to, I think, the really important decisions in front of us for today and direction.
Cool.
So, Councillor Edwards?
When is the next review of DCs?
So there's the 3-yearly review, but what I'm going to be proposing in my recommendations is that the issues that Councillor Dyer is talking about and have been raised in submissions are given to the policy committee to consider within their own work program when those things could be looked at. So that could be done sooner. And that's the time, and alongside the district plan, it feels like it's much more. Yep. Okay. Any other questions? Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you. Just a quick one. I just wanted to know, with the 4-bedroom, bedroom assessment, what has the demand been so far for 4-bedroom homes with the consenting? Have we got a total on that at all?
I don't know if anyone else in the room has more up-to-date information, but I can offer some information if that's helpful.
Please do. Yeah.
Yeah. I looked at some. Stats New Zealand have just released information from the census 2023, and I haven't yet had a chance to access that. But between 2013 and 2018, 4 and more bedroom homes made up roughly 16% of new housing units at that time. So I don't know whether that's a reasonable reflection of the future. Demographics are changing, but at that time, made up roughly 16% of new homes.
Thank you, Dwayne.
Okay, Councillor Mitchell.
Just coming back to the chip remissions for chips, and your suggestion, Dwayne, was that we set up a fund and that be funded out of rates. Is that right?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah. Do we have a feel for developments for chips in Lower Hutt? How many developments are happening through us, through Urban Plus, compared to happening excluding us, our involvement? Do we have any feel for what's happening in the market?
I would probably defer to staff in the room. I do not.
Lucy and John's team did some work and had some conversations with UPL. From memory, off the top of my head, the 500,000 is basically based off about 20 to 30 chips, and obviously, it depends on what size those units are, depending on the discounts they get and so on. So that 500,000 is a rough estimate of about 20 to 30 units being happening every year. But it's very much a bit of a guess, to be honest, based on a bit of history, but there's a lot of uncertainty going forward.
I think we await the government's Kang order review, which should land within the next 6 to 8 weeks. And I think we can anticipate through that review that there will be more development through community housing providers. It seems to be some of those early signals. So again, we've built that in to ultimately what is an estimate.
Yeah, and my question really was, I guess to rephrase it, are we the only developer for chips in Lower Hutt, or are there chips developing through other developers or by themselves?
There are chips that develop as outside of the work that Urban Plus does, yes.
Yeah. I guess what my line of thinking was along the rates funded element of it, and with Urban Plus, we have quite a nice separation where we can tell our ratepayers, your rates aren't funding what Urban Plus is up to over there. If there was a way to kind of ring fence some urban plus profits to keep it circular within urban plus rather than making it a rates requirement, but that would only service urban plus, obviously. So I think clearly this fund here is a bit more of a free-for-all and catering to the whole market. Yeah.
Just the question, I mean, why do we have to have a rate fund rather than just say we'll forego the revenue basically from the DC? I mean, what's the difference?
Yeah, I mean, there's basically a choice. We could say that it could be debt funded because we know development contributions are really, we're using it to fund our growth-related infrastructure, which is debt funded. So if we're trimming back our revenue settings for the DCs, we link it all to debt. So we could choose to say that community housing providing, that 500,000 is debt funded rather than rates funded. It's really a choice that we've got. Obviously, there's a lot of pressure on our debt. There's a lot of things. We've got big debt levels, so we just got to be careful with those choices and any other decisions that we make that also require further debt funding. Because at the end of the day, there's higher interest costs and there's an impact to rates.
Okay, any other questions? No. So what we'll do is we'll work through the list that's here and then anything else which members want to cover in this particular policy. So the first one is the approval of project changes. We're comfortable with that. I think that's pretty straightforward. Yes. Okay, tick. Direction on a transition option for charges. I'm going to propose in the recommendations that we do a third, a third, a third over 3 years. And that third, a third, a third is for the valley floor. So that's just a slight correction to my rec that you would have seen in the papers prior. So we can pull that up. Is there any debate or discussion on that approach?
Was that option 2?
Option 2, yes. Councillor Stallinger?
Not really a debate, but happy to second you in that recommendation. That's okay.
Cool. Okay. We can come to the recs in a moment formally, but we can just keep working through. Direction on a remission for registered chips. So we're comfortable with the recommendation supports the introduction of a development fee contributions remission for registered community housing providers as proposed in Section D of the officer's report. And I believe important for us to include a clawback in that. Is there a amount of time that would, I was minded like 15 years, felt like about the right gauge on that. Yep. Okay, so we can put a clawback period of 15 years. And I think for any further advice around that, to come back to the 4th of June on some of the conversations that have been had. But I think, is that enough direction for the team on that? Okay, the assessments rates for retirement villages, are we comfortable with what Dwayne explained? Yes, okay. And direction on 4 or more bedrooms assessments. What's the thoughts on this one? My view is, in the feedback base, was to scrap that additional requirement, but we could ask for some more information. Councillor Dye?
Yeah, I think we keep it in there for the reasons that we put it there in the first place. There was feedback on different housing types and those that would affect. But I think we've got to remember this is just new developments in our city, and we know we have a huge shortage of 1 and 2 bedroom townhouses in our city. Obviously, there's been a lot of development over the past few years, which is great from Plan Change 43, but there's still a huge shortage of that kind of housing, and that's exactly the sort of housing we want to see in our city. You free up the 4 and 5 bedroom houses by providing 1 and 2 bedroom apartments and better living for those people that are looking at downsizing and then freeing up those bigger houses. So I think we've got to remember this is purely just new developments. And do we want to see lots of 4 and 5 bedroom houses built in our city? I don't think so. But we've already got a lot of them which will be freed up.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. The only thing I would say is that the demand is the 1 and 2 and the larger. So I suppose it's a question. I mean, I hear your sort of logic to that, but we could have an impact on the market where they say, well, we're only going to do a 3, even though we were potentially thinking of doing a 4. I mean, that's based on the feedback we've got from developers. Any other thoughts? Go around the table, Councillor Briggs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. hear the comments, and I know in previous terms as well around particularly large intergenerational households. But I think in essence, what we're talking about here is demand pressure on infrastructure. And so if it's a large number of people occupying a large house, that's going to put demand on the infrastructure. Therefore, the growth pays for growth principle kind of comes into line at that point for me. And so therefore, I think leaving it as appropriate based on the principles that we've already discussed and agreed on.
Councillor Brown?
I'm the same, that to leave it in there because it is about, this is, as Councillor Dyer mentioned, is about new developments, and we are encouraging responding to the need. The intergenerational, there are a lot of houses around that are current houses that I would like to know if there was any information on whether these 4 bedrooms are around intergenerational, what the demographic makeup is, or are they, don't know. So I'd rather see it.
Councillor Mitchell?
Yeah, I'm happy for it to be left in there too, partly on the basic principle of the demand, extra demand on services there. I think too, it was mentioned by developers that they anticipated on maybe a reduction in supply of these homes. So they've asked for a reduction in the fee here. They asked us for a reduction on the fees on all manner of things, actually, when we think about it in a totality. And at the end of the day, this is about new homes, and the development of homes to an extent is always about supply and demand. So if there is demand for these larger homes, and people are willing to pay, then I think those houses will be built. So, yeah, not so convinced at the fact that everyone's going to stop building them. If people want them, they will be built. I think there's an element of supply and demand there too, but on a basic principle as well, it is about the demand on those services.
Okay, is there any contrary views? Councillor Barrett and Councillor Parkin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to speak on the social aspect of the need for 4-bedroom homes. We have a lot of families. We know that we've got 1 in 8 families who have children in poverty. We also know that we have a lot of displaced families in the Hutt because our housing isn't big enough to accommodate them. We have families moving in from other areas that are taking in parents and grandchildren and nieces and nephews because they're coming from other areas because the housing in their area has not been enough to sustain them. And it's happening here in our Hutt City as well. If we do not have the provision for 4-bedroom homes, we are going to further displace our families as it is. We have a big problem here and we need to accommodate that.
Councillor Parkin?
Kia ora. So I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second as well. By not building 4-bedroom new homes or by discouraging it, we are pushing those larger families into older houses, which means that they're using the older housing stock, which is not as well insulated, it's not as well built. And so we are having a detrimental effect on that. Now, that said, if we've got chips that are prepared to build the 4-bedroom houses, then it actually negates that problem because the chips get the developer DC contribution relief anyway. So I'm playing devil's advocate for myself. But just I think we do need to, I would love if we could actually have some more information on that.
I feel as if, and in my view of not including it at this point in time, is that this could go into the melting pot for consideration when we do maybe a broader understanding of changes to our rate remission policy, a broader piece of work. And because it just feels like I think everyone's making really good points, and it's difficult to know where the truth lies if there is a single truth around it all. That's kind of my view, but I don't disagree with all the points being made. Deputy Mayor Lewis?
Yeah, thank you. I was just interested after hearing the developer, mention that Pacifica and perhaps not so much Māori, we were looking for homes that were, intergenerational. So finding up that stat of 16% is interesting. I think too that perhaps for the next, so I'm happy with what we're voting on here to keep it in, but I just think for the next round of when we review it again, that perhaps we have, how many homes have been built like that, so we have the stats in front of us as well.
Well, it would be changing from what's currently in place, and if we're reviewing this in the next 6 months, we're not going to have the data, any real data of the impact. So, Councillor Dyer.
Could I ask Dwayne a question, if possible? Dwayne, if we were to remove the 4-bedroom from the DC policy, would that have any impact on the rates that we're charging?
Through the chair, do you mean the development contribution rates?
Yeah, like the EHU rates, would they change if we were?
No, the model is not sophisticated enough to account for the different EHUs that different development types generate. That is something to consider as part of, I think, as part of that review the Mayor was referring to earlier. What I can say is, I think, on the if development, a 4-bedroom and more homes was around 16% of your new developments going forward, then roughly you're going to lose about 4% of revenue though in the next few years as a consequence of that. But it'll ultimately be made up longer term. But to answer your question, no. In terms of setting the DC charges for the 1st of July, it wouldn't make any difference.
Councillor Edwards.
I'd be in favour of leaving what's in there to do with 4 bedrooms. We're just straying away from this growth pays for growth principle too much for me. And in fact, I would advocate the option that officers are calling for, with a reduction of 20% in year 1, and they're sort of reviewing it then rather than third. But I'm not going to vote against third. But we are racking up debt that falls on everyone else, and I like the principle of growth pays for growth. And of course, we are already agreeing to some fairly substantial reductions after our review. We've moved a long way off what we were originally proposing.
Yep. No, I think this is on the edges a bit. So if we leave it as it is in the recommendations, we can put that to the vote, of course, if we want to take that separately. And is there anything else with this policy? No? Okay, well, what we'll do now is move through to the recommendations and make sure that we've captured everything. Okay, so a few different colours here. So I hope you're not colourblind. Okay, so just to explain it, there's the officer recommendations and then mine, along with some edits in the blue, just to make it clear that it's for the valley floor in recommendation 3, and also the additional recommendations 5 and 6, which is what Dwayne mentioned earlier. Okay. So I just think the key thing in regards to that further piece of work is recommendation 8, which is asking the policy committee to consider within its work program any further review of targeted development contribution remissions to help support broader city outcomes. I've tried to keep that as sort of wide as possible, but ultimately it will come down to that committee within its own current busy work program deciding whether that's a priority piece of work. So I don't want to say that it will happen. It's just a case of referring it on to that committee, and they can make the call within their own program and considerations. Cool. Okay. Yep, Councillor Dyer.
Sorry, I was reading it pretty quick. Is there anything in there about the reduction? I think the original recommendations had something about considering the proposed options with reducing the number 2, option 3. Yeah, so that option 2 is staging it, and it talks about the valley floor over 3 years, but there's also that initial period that was done of reducing the DCs overall. Is that?
Yeah, that's recommendation 2.
Cool.
Yep. Okay, so I'll move the recommendations 1 through to 9. Over seconder, Councillor Salinger. Any discussion? Councillor Salinger.
Thank you for your recommendations, Mr Mayor. I see this as a very important decision for the city, and I believe we've been well served by the quality of the reports and the analysis behind it. I was a bit surprised to see the size of the adjustments based on the new information, but overall that just gives me more confidence that we have done a good review and have been very accurate in what we've done. I also thought the submissions we received were quality submissions, as they've been in a number of areas, particularly this round of LTP. And to me, I've spent a lot of time thinking about them. Perhaps the only thing I might challenge, not in a sense a challenge, but take a slightly different view from Mr Fletcher, is whether or not the size of the fees would have an impact on future development. I think at the margins they will. I'm not sure to what extent, of course, but I am aware that for developments to go ahead, there's a certain amount of profit that needs to be produced in the forecasts in order for banks to be prepared to loan. And I think that's around about the 20% level, given the risks involved. Now, a 4% increase in costs is or can be significant in terms of whether that margin is achieved or not. So my concern has really been what would be the impact if there's a significant reduction in development, and our charges have played a part in that. And that's influenced my thinking, not just in terms of whether we'd get the DC income, which we're relying on as far as our rates levels, but also the regulatory income we get from the activity through our regulatory department, and also the extra rates which we're relying on as a result of the growth we forecast. Perhaps even more important than all of that, are we going to get the homes that the city needs? So for that reason, I think the recommendations before us are good ones. I think they will go a long way to alleviating the concerns that were raised during the consultation, and I'm very happy to support them.
Any other comments? Councillor Dyer.
Yeah, you make some really good points there, Councillor Stellinger. I agree with nearly all of them. I don't want to start a precedent of thanking every submission that's come to us, because we've had a lot, but I did really want to acknowledge the submissions we had from the developers and the James Beebans of the world. I think they were all very pragmatic submissions, and they all acknowledged that growth must pay for growth. And I think we've got to a really good place here. Just touching on some of the points that Councillor Stellinger raises, I think it is something we do need to keep an eye on. Obviously, we're looking at passing this to the policy team to review, and in 3 years' time we'll review it as well. But we are now going to have the highest DCs in the region, and it will have some impact on the development we see, and it'll be good to have an eye on that over the next 12 months, 2 years, to see how much impact these DCs are doing, because we know it's not just DCs that are going to dictate where people decide to build homes and where they decide to move. It's going to be much more than that, of creating a great city, which is ultimately what this whole long-term plan process is about. But I think it is something we do need to keep our eye to.
Councillor Brown and Councillor Briggs.
Thank you. And yeah, I want to acknowledge the submitters as well. The first day we had a lot of the developers and planners, and very reasonable, backed up with the statistics and thorough in acknowledging that we still need to pay for growth. I want to point out that in all of this, in all of our challenges, that we stay mindful that we have our hotels are still full of tamariki and are still full of people, and they've been there for a long time. And there are some changes happening at central government that we hope will support that. But our part is encouraging the build of community houses and public housing that, as Urban Plus has done to date, are of a very high level. And they're warm, and they only require 1 hour's heating a day. This morning, the Auckland Starship Child Hospital is the highest it's been in 20 years, and it's mostly around bronchial. They are packed, they can't take any more children, and they've never been this full at this time of year in 20 years. And the main doctor put that around housing, the impact. They get the children better, they go back into these houses. So anything that we can do as a lever that supports community housing providers, building of new houses, high quality, that keep tamariki warm is really positive. So I'm really proud that we are making some contribution in that area too. So kia ora.
Councillor Briggs.
Support many of the comments said before me. One thing I just want to raise is obviously with the staged approach, growth isn't paying for growth for the next few years, it's contributing towards growth. And it's the realisation that the rest of our city will be taking on that burden during this time as well. And acknowledging, you know, the submissions that we've received and that we're responding to them accordingly. But it's also, unfortunately, if we're in an economic state in 3 years' time where it's also hard for everyone in our city, that deferral is the enemy of progress. And if we keep deferring things or staggering them out, then there is always a cost. And that cost in this case is debt. And that debt is all of our debt. So again, I'll be supportive today, but it's something that is definitely dwelling on my mind of what's the long-term repercussion of this decision as well.
My final comment would just be to tautoko the comments of councillors on this, and the submissions that did come through, I think were incredibly constructive and looked pragmatically to work with us around what a solution looked like. And I completely understand from a developer point of view that particularly if you were planning to develop on the valley floor, to see the level of increase at maybe a time when you weren't expecting that in the current environment. I mean, it blows some of your planning and assumptions out of the water. So I'm glad that we've been able to take that on board, and I think come up with an option which factors that in. The other thing I'd just say, which hasn't been touched on, is that this process and the way that we do it just demonstrates, I think, often how broken our local government processes are and how we do things. Just looking at it from even a regional perspective, you know, this is the type of exercise that should be done across the Wellington region. So we are actually thinking about what that means across, you know, housing across our entire area. And, you know, it's also demonstrated, I think, that when you have these situations where you do a review once every 3 years, particularly with an investment program where we're looking to uplift that infrastructure investment, you can experience these types of hikes. Something for us to be incredibly mindful of in future reviews, and I think should be in the mix for that broader policy discussion on remissions as well. Well, not necessarily just remissions, but how we do development fee contributions. So I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Thank you. First one done. 55 to go. No. Okay. Thank you, Dwayne. Appreciate your work. 5D, which is Petone Wharf, and this is on page 247 of your agenda. Andrea. Thanks, and welcome Arthur as well.
Kia ora tātou through you, Mr. Chair. There's been quite a lot of discussion on this topic already, so we'll take the paper as read. Elected members have also received a document from Rockbond which outlines their proposal. Over the last 2 days in the hearings, you've heard a number of different views and other options as well around the wharf. And all of those things I'm sure you're going to want to take into consideration. Also today you've heard the result of Council's LTP consultation on the topic of Petone assets. So in the paper we've provided you with 5 options to consider. 2 of those options that were included in the LTP consultation document. Of course, though, you are able to consider other options either for the set of assets or for the assets individually. I'm sure you'll want to discuss it further, and we are happy to help with any answers that support that discussion.
Thank you. Questions? Okay, Councillor Briggs.
Thanks, Andrea. Of the other options provided in the report, how many of those went to the Petone working group as they were kind of discussing and thinking of ways forward for the community before coming to the LTP process?
The options that were put up through the consultation, none of those exact options came. They were put forward by parties that weren't involved in the Petone project group work, but there were some similarities. The Petone project looked at a couple of options around refurbishing a shorter wharf, so just refurbishing the approach and not the head. I think that was the workshop that we had with elected members. That was one of the options that was put up there. So I think there have been probably around about a dozen options looked at over the last year or so, and so the actual scope of the project proposed yesterday probably wasn't one that hasn't been discussed here before.
Okay, other questions? No other questions? Okay. Well, what I'll do then as a starter for 10 is I'm going to put up some recommendations which I'm happy to put up for discussion. I'm not necessarily saying I have to move them immediately or anything like that, but I think it's just to get the ball rolling for us on all three, Petone Wharf, Petone Library and Petone Grandstand. So what my recommendations here would, I'll go through them. So the first one would be to direct officers to commission an independent report to consider the options for maintaining, rebuilding Petone Wharf, including the merits of different technology, heritage aspects, lifetime costs, and associated risks. Agrees for the report to be presented to the Petone Community Board and Petone Steering Group for feedback before being presented to Council for a decision on which option to progress. Alongside that, we would agree to a budget of a maximum cap of $12 million in the long-term plan, and any options explored through the independent process must not exceed this budget. That, in saying that, so that's obviously a lift up from 6 to 12. We would then look to agree to the budget of $5 million for to repair Petone Library, but I think it's important we note the officer's advice around that being a high-level estimate. There's a risk that could be more. I think we just need to be open about that. But obviously that would be a $5 million reduction from what was in our draft long-term plan. And then the final recommendation is to a budget of $3 million, which is a $600,000 increase, and directs officers to report back on options for the grandstand, including toilets and changing block. So that would be a more broader look at retention of the roof or removal of the roof with the seating and not closing off those options, but clearly with a maximum budget again of $3 million of what's possible from within that. So that is my picture of what I'm painting to you, and I'm happy to open it up for any discussion as well. How about we just go from, I'll go from the right this time. We can keep going. That's right. Okay. No one. So it's from the left. Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, just noting the figures up there, total to 18 million, which is slightly lower than option 1 and a couple of million lower than option 2. So we're actually talking about reducing our investment in Petone based on those figures. And the Petone, the grandstand one in particular, is an uplift on the cheaper option. So it's kind of falling somewhere in between. I just wonder what the intention is for the grandstand, and whether, in the interests of keeping our total investment the same, we add back 0.4 million to one of the options there, either the grandstand or the library, I assume would be my preference.
So the 400,000, the grandstand? So,
well, I don't know. The grandstand's already been, if you look at option 1, which was an $18.4 million option, the grandstand now has already up there an extra 0.6 million.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I don't know what the intention is to try and get more than what we have.
Yeah, my thoughts with that, sorry if I didn't explain it, is to have a bit of an additional budget to see if there is an ability to retain rather than demo the roof and the seating and just work on the grandstand, to provide a little bit more flexibility to see if that's doable. But I suppose it's leaving that open for options to come back. We don't have to do that. It's just I think a little bit more realistic to build.
I think that's fine. My other point is that we're still actually reducing our investment in Petone by 0.4 million, and whether that should be added back into either the grandstand or to the library to allow for a bit further expansion.
Sorry. So you're saying the total investments?
Sorry, my bad maths.
No,
it's the same. It's the same. Yep.
Yeah, it's the same.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's the first time in 4.5 years, you've made a mistake. Councillor Brown.
So you've got a maximum cap of $12 million. There's been lots of projects in the past that have had maximum caps. You get couple of long-term plans down the track, next minute it's blown out to needing double, triple, quadruple that. How will we ensure that doesn't happen?
Yeah, I think that's where the independent advice will be absolutely key. What then would need to happen, I would assume, and officials may want to comment on this, is around a tendering type process where ultimately you would be working to a certain budget. But I'm happy to get Andrea to comment on that.
Yes, I think the 12 million, the intention would be through the report to understand lifetime costs, not just the initial project costs. So what are the lifetime costs? Look at what the costs are over the LTP, and also that would have to include a QRA. And a QRA for this kind of project, we have normally set at 20-25%. So that would help us manage some of those risks. So yeah, the 12 would need to include all of those aspects.
And I would say that that 12 million would include any cost of the process as well. So we would, in regards to an independent person and the likes. Yep. So it's the full. Yep. Sorry, a few hands went up. Councillor Morgan, I think, was next.
Kia ora. Yeah, my question is just in respect to that, we'd have to go out to tender. What would we have a time frame in mind for that, or that's up to the tender process and what that would look like? And secondly, with that, so we'd get every option, let's say with the Petone Wharf, every single option and what it would be costed out as. So from potentially demolished to keeping this much to, is that how you see that working?
I think we would need to give this direction to officers to bring back some more advice around this. So if we give this direction today, because the team haven't had a chance to go through that, but this would be looking for proposals around retention maintaining. We've got a decent idea already of obviously what a demolition would cost. Yeah. Is that fair? Yep. Yeah. Councillor Parkin.
Kia ora. Happy to see the approach for the wharf. My concern is around the Petone Library and a similar thing that Councillor Brown mentioned, that we get into the situation where we think we know how much it's going to cost and suddenly it ends up costing a lot more. I'm aware of the Wellington Town Hall seismic strengthening blowout, and it simply would have been cheaper to build a new building. Just want to make sure that the process doesn't cut that off. If we actually look at, as we start going through the report, if we actually look at it and go, actually, hang on, the repair is going to cost more than a rebuild, do we still have that option of a new build left open?
We're making a pretty clear decision here that a new build is off the table. If, of course, as you go through the process and a new build comes in at $10 million, I mean, the council of that time would need to consider the information in front of it. But what we are saying here for the long-term plan is that we're allocating $5 million for basically a repair and maintain. Yeah. Sorry, Councillor Shaw, then Councillor Mitchell.
Just a question about Petone Grandstand. Does that increase to 3 include the refurbishment or whatever of the changing rooms, which I believe we have a responsibility to provide? At the moment, it's just written down as seating shelter, but does include toilets and changing rooms as well.
Oh, sorry, no, that's
exactly
slightly, yep,
slightly. Sorry, I was just reading here.
Yep, no, that's all good. Any other on this side? Sorry. Yep, Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, I think this is a good set of recommendations. I think it is a shame that we've kind of discounted the potential for that Petone Library site and exploring further what might be done there that could build in, you know, a resilience aspect as well as the potential for housing on there, to be honest. But there didn't seem to be any appetite from our feedback and submissions for that. I share Councillor Parkin's concerns that I'm worried about that $5 million budget and whether it will be enough. But yeah, very happy that we've landed where we have with the wharf. I hope that 12 million doesn't become a target. It would be nice to be able to do something under that, but overall very happy with the recommendations.
I think based on a couple of comments, any further information, knowing that you will be pretty limited on Petone Library and that $5 million budget and the risks. I know there's some information on that, but Andrea, did you want to make any comment?
I think just what is in the recommendation is quite important about this being a high-level estimate that has been a number that we've talked about for a little while, but also that the facility is in poor condition. In fact, the main issue with the building has been water tightness, but just this week we've had a new condition report and some concerns raised around the atrium. I don't know, people may have seen that we've had some urgent work done to prop up the supports in the atrium area. So there are increasing issues there. I would share concerns that $5 million might not be enough, but I think probably we couldn't put another number on it until we had done some more work and scoped it out, and we would bring that back.
Thank you. I think the key thing here is eyes wide open. That's so it's not a surprise for governors on that, nor for our community who listen to these discussions and read our papers. Okay, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. Just for me, a point of clarification. It may seem a dumb blonde sort of thing to ask, but under the Petone Wharf and any options explored through the independent process. So we put a cap on that for $12 million. Does that include, or will the information coming back include any further maintenance, and for how long?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and the thinking would be, you know, this is what is the cost across the lifetime of that asset? So it's in there. It would be in there. Yep. And there may be a number of different approaches to that, but that's what we're keen for that independent person to explore. Yep. Andrea, does that make? Yep. Okay, I'm just going to Councillor Dye and then Councillor Stallinger.
Yeah, I won't say too much. I'm fairly happy with these recommendations. I think it's a pretty pragmatic way forward. Like Councillor Edwards, though, I hope that isn't a $12 million target. I still like the idea of the $6 million guaranteed number if that comes through on a piece of paper. Just because we've got a budget there of 12 million, I hope we're not going to aim for that. So, yeah, I think given where we are, it's a good way forward. I do feel like it's going to be probably another year now that we're talking about the wharf till anything's done, and the big boards down there still saying wharf's closed are going to annoy some people thinking just what's going on with the wharf. But yeah, I think it's the reality is hitting home that this is a tricky decision and this is probably the best way forward.
Councillor Stallinger.
Just a quick point of clarification for me, again about the wharf. There it talks about the cap for the period of the LTP, but a couple of times we've had the comment about the lifetime costs, which is obviously a bigger number. So just wanting to be clear that, and it's a question, that the 12 million cap is for the period of the LTP, not what may be needed further down the track.
Yeah, yes, yeah, no, that's a fair observation. I think that's, yep. It would be on the LTP funding, yep. We're comfortable with that? I mean, it's obviously a bit harder to project out further. Okay. Councillor Tupou, and then Councillor Briggs, then Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just noting the submissions, but also the analysis showed quite a lot of support for the Petone Wharf, but actually also substantial support for the library or community hub. So just hearing the comments from Andrea before, I'm just hoping that we do justice
to that library piece, as there seems to be quite a resounding yes from the community on that. Kia ora.
Councillor Briggs.
Just a question first to Andrew, just around risk. I know in the past when we've done projects, sometimes we've used the risk of a P level of how, P90, P95, and that served us quite well when we've done that. What's your view on us setting expectation around that P level so that when we're going through this process and scoping and procurement, that we're kind of working to a budget that's not going to blow out because we know it's got a bit of risk built into it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, in relation to the wharf, I think previous projects we've set at a P95, but it would be at your discretion if you wanted to go higher than that.
I think if we, I think if we were to get some advice on that for 4th of June, but I think council would be in a position where we were maybe talking P95 at least. I think that's. Is there we can give that direction now. We prefer.
I think giving the direction now is useful, and so that therefore any advice that comes out from officers, but also from the independent expert as well, that they're working to those parameters rather than us putting them in later on, because some of the solutions may not be viable if it's at P95 compared to P50. So let's just be realistic from the get-go.
Yep. Okay. Okay, we'll give that direction now, and just if we could have some further information back on that, so we're not, I think this is helpful as well. Okay. Councillor Morgan. Oh, sorry, Councillor Mitchell, then Councillor Morgan.
Thank you. A couple of questions for me. One to do with the wharf. The paper referred to the proposal we did receive from Rock Bond already, and how they could only make an initial proposal based on the condition report from a few years ago and their own visual inspection, and they basically said they would need an initial engineering or dive report in order to firm up their costings. The same may well apply to all potential providers of solutions here. Is there a value in us commissioning an updated condition report, again, to share with all potential tenderers so they know exactly what we're getting in for?
I think we would probably take that advice from the person leading that work, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was a recommendation.
Thank you. And my other question about Petone Library, which I probably should have asked at least a year ago, but a lot of people talked about the entrance to Britannia Street, and that's a change they would like to see. And when we are talking about repairing Petone Library, is it just the library building where the books are housed and the Heritage Centre, or is it the adjoining building as well?
It's the whole facility, but how far the money will stretch in terms of repair. Repair would be the first priority. And initially, we had hoped to do some internal changes around the entrance, but I think now we're probably just talking repair.
And the adjoining building, the extent of the repairs in there, is that still mostly about roofs and leaking, or is there other structural work that's required in there?
I probably can't answer that, but generally it has been about the roof and being watertight.
Councillor Morgan, then Councillor Dyer.
Kia ora. I just also want to raise my concern about the library and the 5 million, just from my experience around buildings and any sign of leak and what that can actually uncover, and the money and then the reports and the ongoing reports that you have to find to get to the actual problem and the cause of all these things. So, yep, we're doing the right thing, looking at that, but I do want it stated that I have concerns, and I would probably definitely prefer from the people talking to me who I'm representing, the other option. But also just want to say that I just think as a democracy, I think this process of what's been presented here today is pretty magnificent actually, and I think that the people have really been listened to. I think as a representative, I've had a number of people on the other side of saying that they believe in demolishing it actually, and they're concerned that it's going to be an ongoing cost. And so when I saw these presented, you think, oh, option one, that's representing what some of the voices are saying to me and what people have been saying to me. So I think by doing this, I think we're doing a really robust process and service that will give us all of the answers, and then we're in a really good position to make the best decision for the city. So thank you to the officers and thank you for putting up these options.
Okay. Councillor Dyer.
Kia ora, thank you, Mr Mayor. There's no mention up there about demolish. Are we sort of making it clear now that in some way or another the wharf will be saved, or is demolish still potentially on the cards as part of this review?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that if through an independent process, if retention and refurbishment or maintaining or rebuilding the wharf is not doable in some form within $12 million, then we would be going back to that original position. I think that's, just to be really clear on that. Something comes back and actually to meet sort of a certain criteria, if it's going to cost 15, 20 over that 10-year period, then we're back to that demolition. So we should be really clear. I think it's a good question to ask with the community on that. Yeah. Cool. Councillor Mitchell.
The community actually spoke a lot in the last few months about the uncertainty of the cost of demolition. So will we, as part of this process, at least be trying to come to a firmer figure of what demolition would cost if we defaulted to that option? Because we haven't been able to say with any certainty. We've had a petition from many people telling us they would like us to save the wharf if it costs less than demolition. And I don't think really a lot of people would argue with that, even the people who have said they don't think it's a good thing to spend money on. If it's spending less money on it to keep it than to demolish it, I think people would be happy to keep it. But we still, and it was literally used as a tool by people opposing demolition, that the demolition cost was so uncertain that whatever option they were favouring was guaranteed to be cheaper than that. But we really didn't know, I think, with any clarity on what that demolition cost was. So I just wonder if it's worth getting a firmer idea of what demolition would cost or may cost, at least so that figure is firm in people's minds, as well as these new proposals that come in.
Thoughts on that, Andrea?
Through you, Mr Chair, I think what the report will give us is more updated costs, which will be great, and I think probably a more updated dive inspection and information. Whatever comes back, I think there will still be a lot of risk around variation of costs, and I think we've found with Point Howard Wharf that it's costing us, is it twice as much? It's a lot more than we budgeted, because with these structures, I'm not an expert on wharves, but from what I've seen with these structures, that once you start to take them apart, it's not until you start to take them apart that you realise the extent of what is there or is not there, and also the impacts of what happens when you start to take them apart. I think we've said the whole way through that this is a vulnerable structure, that it's a complex and risky project, and so those aspects would still be in there. So I think that you'd still have to, look at the numbers knowing that, but it will definitely give us more up-to-date information on the condition of the wharf and of current pricing.
And we've talked about building in a lot of risk to the prices for the other options there. So I think if you're building in a lot of risk to every option, then that's a fair way of approaching it, yeah.
Okay, so just for clarity then, are we asking that under sort of recommendation 1, that the demolition be part of that as well in regards to what comes back? I just want to clarify, or are we comfortable with officials as they have gone through the process they have, but building in that additional risk that may be there? Does that make sense?
I think if there's a suggestion, and there was a suggestion from you, that we may at some stage default to demolishing if nothing can be done for 12 million, we need to know how much that would cost.
Yeah, okay. Is there any thing on the recommendations with that feedback, Andrea, that would be helpful?
I think the first recommendation probably covers that, which is options. Oh, well, actually, given the conversation, you may want to put something in then. Yeah. So you could just remove maintaining and rebuilding options for Petone Wharf.
Yep. Okay, they're comfortable with that? Yep. Sorry, there were quite a few hands that went up over here just before. Was there questions or clarity? No? Okay, Councillor Brown.
Going back to the library, if, as often happens, once exploration's done, the work is going to be too much to do, I'm going to note back to the feedback and written submission, slightly more comments favour the development of a multi-purpose hub than refurbishing the existing library. I think in the community there is support for that. Is there will there be a plan B if once you start looking that, as Councillor Parkin said, it's going to cost too much to repair what's far too broken already?
Well, the council will have to address that at the time. So we can't, yeah, that's the reality. Okay. Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you. Thanks for everybody's input. My question is around timeframe, assuming we all support these options that have been put up. What are we looking at? And my thinking is on the timeframe thing for, say, the wharf is just the 7 years or whatever it's been closed, and just, you know, the waiting. And I understand that we have to get our numbers right, but just a rough idea of timeframe.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think that would have to be part of the report, because some of the options that were discussed over the last few days have included reopening at different parts at different times, etc. So I think that would have to be part of the consideration of the report.
I think the key thing would be the independent person. I mean, that work would start as soon as we can, as we get through this LTP process. Yeah, and their work. Yeah, and also with the first option, if we are bringing back all information and all data, if we're going to be talking about the real cost of demolition, could we also include the, it was raised yesterday, the extra cost, if it does go back there again, if we put the community back there again through this, the cost on that community, for the officers that will be involved in, because it will be environment court and things like that. So that's my concern. Just those costs if it comes back, and that if it's going to be included in option 1. I'm not quite sure what you're asking, Deputy Mayor Lewis. If option 1's so open, it's looking at everything, and demolition was mentioned, that's the hard and fast facts of actually physically demolishing something. But then there's all the costs that come on to the community. If they go in to fight the council for demolishing, if it goes there, is that possible to get that factored in, and the officer time to deal with all of that? Yeah, I think the independent person should factor in everything. So I think, but again, I think it's important. This is why we're appointing an independent person, that we let them lead that process and factor in those different considerations. Yep. Okay. Okay, anything else? No? Okay, so we've got the recommendations in front of us, 1 through to 5. I'll move them. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Edwards. Just to make some opening comments, thank you everyone for your work in navigating what has been probably the most challenging issue that we've engaged in on this long-term plan. Thank you to all of the members of the public who submitted and let us know their views. I have to push back on some of the comments from our Petone Community Board Chair, to be quite honest, because he is someone who is experienced within council, who suggested that decisions were predetermined and that we weren't listening. That was really disappointing, because I know for a fact that everyone has been working incredibly hard to engage our community, to be able to take that on board, to ultimately come to this position. And I think the recommendations that we've put forward reflects that, as well as taking into account the significantly, I would say, strong view of many of our ratepayers that they don't feel as if additional money should be going into Petone Wharf. And when you read through the submissions, and while very few, or if any of them chose to speak around the table, there were a lot of comments to that regard, and it's certainly been a strong view put through when I've been out engaging with people, particularly who don't live in Petone. So I think it's important that we acknowledge that voice out there and their concern, often around the wider picture of our rate increase, our debt levels, and the challenges we've got as well. But what I would say is that we have listened to what has been submitted to us and those who have chosen to engage in this process and put that position to us. And I think, Councillor Morgan, you said that quite well in regards to the options that we've ultimately put forward. And it's certainly my desire as Mayor to always take on board what we are hearing and give weight to those who choose to make that additional effort to engage with us and share their views and their thoughts and feelings. So that's always an important consideration in my mind. So I do push back quite strongly against some of those comments that were made yesterday by some. Finally, I just want to say that there's obviously quite a bit of work to do with the wharf from here. We do need to trust in the independent process that we're setting up. I'm going to be guided very much by that person, so it's going to be key that we get the right person in that role. It will be important that we engage with the Petone Community Board, Petone Steering Group, and say Petone Wharf around who that person is. But then we also need to be clear that we need to let them do their job and then have some clear parameters of how they would report back. We cannot have this situation with people writing opinion pieces saying companies can guarantee things and other issues. And I hope that we can have a pretty straight up conversation with some out there on that to allow them to do their job as well. And I'm confident that we'll be able to do that, and they'll support that. Okay, happy to open up any other comments, debate. Councillor Mitchell.
Give this one a try. I don't know if it comes any closer. I just wanted to make some brief comments and again to acknowledge the very strong passion amongst our community particularly around the issue of the wharf. Today's decisions, I think, fulfill a couple of things which are necessary. One is getting some budget lines in for our long-term plan, and that's what we went out and consulted on some options, and we've ended up with a different option today, but it achieves that basic task of indicating where we might head with these Petone assets. The other thing and most important thing for me about today's recommendations is that they're really asking for more clarity. And I think we reached a position in the last few months where things were very unclear to our community and from our community, to be frank, about what we were even discussing in terms of relative numbers and options and all of those things there. There was because of the options we put out, an accusation of predetermination that we were going to demolish the wharf. I just remind our residents, I guess, that 3 years ago we were in exactly the opposite position. We were exploring options, all of which were to save Petone Wharf and refurbish that wharf in different ways. And we reached a place where we decided collectively that none of those options were affordable to our community, and that's why we went out with the options we did. Now there are new options that have come forward and been put on the table, some of them literally in the last couple of days for us. So again, we're in a position now where I think we need a lot more clarity about what those options are, what they mean and what they will cost, not just to do, but across the lifetime of that asset there. So I'm very happy with that recommendation that really is about seeking more clarity now about what our options are now, which are more affordable to our community.
Yeah, Councillor Salinger.
Finding myself in the position with agreeing with Mayor Barry wholeheartedly on another occasion already today. I think it's a good set of recommendations. I'll be supporting them. Agree it's been difficult I hold a similar view to Councillor Morgan and yourself, Mr. Mayor, in terms of the balance of feedback. You know, I've been seeing it from both sides. But I too do place somewhat of a greater weight on those that put in a big effort, and we've seen a huge effort by some, to try and convince us of their point of view, partly because to me that indicates they've got more at stake. So the decision has more of a, is more important to them than perhaps the average submitter. I think putting a cap in sends a good signal, even though we're still uncertain where that may go, and it's a bit disappointing that we can't reach that stage. But I agree with the other speakers that there's been so much information come, we really need to take a breath and come back with that consolidated in one place, a bit of a time free from this process where the officers and their advisors can just weigh that up. And I hope it just don't take too long. I think it will take some time, but not too long. So overall, though, thank you for the recommendations, and I'll support them.
Councillor Tupou.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Your Worship, I just want to acknowledge you on your leadership through this process, and also the local Harbour Ward Councillor Lewis. I've approached this, what I call the Pitione investment, with an open mind, Mr. Mayor. And I've said to many people, put in your feedback and we'll listen. And I think we've stuck to that process. What I've learnt from particularly today, from the officers, from our reports, is that when it comes to asset management, Mr. Mayor, it's the old rule, it's the same with our own homes. The more you look, the more you find. So I think we do approach these things with some caution, and bearing in mind and balancing that with the wishes of the community. So based on that, Mr. Mayor, I support your recommendations. Kia ora.
Councillor Brown.
Kia ora, thank you, and thank you, yes, for your leadership. I'm going to take the whole 2 days, and over the last 2 days, there were several people that told us to look ahead 10 years and to look at what we want to leave, because none of us will be around the table then. And the challenges that we have got in front of us, and the rates rise, as well as the big challenges that we have, and what is it that we want to leave for our future generations. And we are going through some difficult processes at the moment. One of them's in asset management. We've got groups coming that came and talk to us that we're going to make brutal decisions over, who are looking after tamariki, bettering their lives in boxing and all sorts. But we have to make those decisions. We've got to make strong decisions, because or our rates just keep going up. And we had how many come and tell us that the rates are getting out of hand for some residents. So, and we talked yesterday about having a position and having putting our values on the line of where we sit. And we know that with many of the other assets, they're not going to get the pleasure of being able to be saved, and we're going to have to make decisions, and that will be for outcomes of their well-being, for tamariki who are involved in things that we had rugby league come who charge nothing, but they do it for the outcome of the tamariki and the whānau, but here we are having to make those difficult decisions. And I really acknowledge that we're in a position where we're not predetermining. So I think we've even had to all think really late into the night where we sit on this. And I think as a side issue, there was some other options like the library. I'm not sure it was as close, but I'm just going to go back to those values and positions that we have of what we want to leave on the small rate, which is the broken tool called rates, for our mokopuna, and what is the most important thing for their well-being and for their activity and for what benefits them most on that whole element of how we can support with the small tools we have. So that puts me in a real conundrum on this decision, because I know that we've got an asset review that's going to come and make us make even more brutal decisions than this one. So it's a really difficult position. However, I think that the people have spoken. I can see around the table, the councillors have spoken. The remedy is containing the amount. When I first came into council, we had some really big things that are still hanging around us of decisions, and we weren't even sure. We couldn't even sort of identify why the heck we made the decisions we made back then, and we have had to still, and we're still paying for it now. So I know that this is just a process, the leadership that you've shown of getting an external person to look at this. I do want to also acknowledge all the people that came in and submitted. It has been a difficult process for them as well. I am going to support it reluctantly, because I know as chair of the communities that there's other decisions we have to make. And to me, it seems very unfair that we are now going to say to other groups, no, you've got to go because we can't afford this. But it's the right decision we've got to make. So I will support it in as far as taking it to the next independent reports, and the quantification of having the P95 at very least, and take it from there. And I just want to acknowledge Councillor Lewis. I know this is hard process for you, and acknowledge the difficult position you're in, but yeah, kia ora.
Okay. Sorry, Councillor Shaw.
Yeah, it's been one of those ones that we've probably lost a bit of sleep over, and at times it's been quite emotional and confusing, especially around the merits of the different technology that came up and differing points of view, many of them conflicting. And it put us in a difficult place, and we always have to be mindful of the affordability for our ratepayers. But I think through these recommendations today, we've come to a sensible place. I think seeking an independent report is key. I think drawing a line in the Petone Beach sand of $12 million is key as well. And I think we can now move forward with clarity on decisions we have to make that have been quite difficult. But I fully support the recommendations in front of us today. Thank you for the work, everybody.
Thank you. Councillor Dyer.
Kia ora. I won't repeat most of what's been said, but do want to just highlight the points you made at the start, Mr. Mayor, around sort of the constructive criticism. We had a lot on the leading questions in our surveys, and no way for people to have their say, and we've already made up our mind. This is really proof that we are listening. There wasn't even a specific question about the wharf, and here we are making a different decision. While I think it would have been maybe slightly easier to make this decision if we had a question on the wharf, we won't know, but we are changing our mind here based on the feedback we got. But I think we do need to make it really clear that this is the wharf's last chance, and that a decision has to be made, because the longer we keep delaying this, the more the wharf's being eaten away by those worms and rotting away, and it's only going to cost more to demolish it and only going to cost more to repair it. So we simply must actually make a decision, because it is such a hard decision, and I think the way forward is a good one. But I can see this still just taking another year, and it won't be till the next annual plan where we're really locking in one of these options, which I think is too long, but it's the most pragmatic way forward. There was a lot of really emotional submissions over the last 2 days, and a lot in the written submissions as well. Everyone has a wharf story. I'm hoping that the local businesses, they have their own emotional connection to them. A lot of them are based in Petone as well that have come and presented. So just, yeah, really want to shout out to them that they really need to put their best foot forward, because we simply have to make a decision on this. The wharf's not saved, demolish is still on the cards, but I think, like Councillor Mitchell said before, if there's an option that's cheaper than demolish, it's almost guaranteed we'll go ahead with it. But until we've got those numbers in front of us, we now need to work with those local contractors to really get the best deal we can.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you, and thank you, everybody. It has been a hard road. I've listened a lot, and I've heard what you've all heard. The biggest thing for me is having the data, and I think the decision would have been much easier and cleaner. We would have had it all done and dusted by this long-term plan if we'd had the the latest facts and the full picture of what things were going to cost, if that was possible. Yep, and we all did listen. I know that you were all very attentive, proof in the headache I've had for the last few days. But I know the community as well, they just want the decision to build. They don't perhaps see the enormity that, we have to take on the rates bill and things like that for everybody else. The benefits I do see in this asset, because as you know, I do believe it is an asset, it is to the region, and I think the benefit will come from the stories we heard, the wellbeing stories of it's a free asset for everybody to go out and enjoy, the haora that people get there, the mental health space that it does affect you when you're out over the water. And I think the benefits in that are huge. I also think the benefits of, as I said in my piece in the paper the other week, that, this is the potential, and we heard it from one of the submitters about being positive to the future and having, our story, and this builds into the story of the region and Pitaoni as well. It is our icon, and I think we can use this to build on. That the wharf gets finished, in my mind, and it is everywhere on Instagram around the world. People want to go and have that shot taken there when they're on their bike. So I do think there's a big future for our city in having this asset, and I just want to thank you for the recommendations, Mr. Mayor, that you have put together, and let's hope we can get all the data and the details so we can make the best decision. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to close it off there. I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried unanimously. Okay, thank you. We'll now move through to Huia Pool. Sorry, we've been going for 2 hours. It's gone quick, hasn't it? Used to being in this room now. So we will take, Ian, we will take a 5-minute break if that's okay. And yeah, back here, let's say at 5 to 1. Oh, just make it 1 o'clock. It gives you 10 minutes. Yep. Sorry, we'll go till 1:15, so it's a lunch break. Thanks. Great, thank you, everyone. We'll get back into things. Okay. Update on Huia pool refurbishment. So we've got Andrew and Ian here for any comments they'd like to make to the report, and then open up for any questions.
Kia ora, everyone. As you know, we've got a significant project planned around Huia pool that has two parts to it. There has a refurbishment that removes the moving floor and also the decarbonisation project, which is changing from gas to electric heat pumps. They've been in the budget for a while, and because they are now pending, we've done some more detailed work, and the cost of doing them has increased from originally 3.7 million to now 8.8 million. You'll see in the paper that given the increase, we've stepped back and taken a broader look at whether this is still the right project and whether it's still the right way to be investing money. We think that it is, and so we are proposing that some other budgets be reprioritised so that we can proceed with this work as planned. Happy to take questions.
Questions from members? Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. I just had a question about the it's paragraph 6 that I'm proposing offsetting some of the funding by reducing the asset maintenance and renewals contingency fund over 10 years of the long-term plan by about 30 or 40%. Is that assets maintenance and renewals contingency fund, that fund presumably is not just for Huia pool, it's for all assets, and it's a contingency fund, so how is that used? I assume that we budget for a lot of renewals and this is a contingency fund for unexpected work?
Yes, it is. It's currently 1.1 million, and we're suggesting reducing it to 670k per annum. It is for unexpected work, but we also think that with the asset management plans that we have in place now, which we've brought in for this long-term plan, there's likely to be less call on it because a lot of other things have been anticipated. So with that in mind, we're comfortable with that reduction.
Okay, any other questions? No, great. So we've got the recommendations in front of us. I'll move recommendations 1 through to 4. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Brown. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Thank you. 5F, which is the proposed initiative to improve equity in access to aquatic services, and this is on page 270. Again, we'll pass it over.
And we'll take the paper as read. I think you're aware that through the Whakatupu Nainai project, there's been a sort of renewed focus on equity to access to our swimming pools. The Nainai community were keen to ensure that when the fantastic new pool that's going to open there soon, when it does open, that their community is able to access it and that cost is not a barrier. So we were asked to have a look at some of the options to achieve that. We looked at what we currently do around equity. We looked at what some other pool operators have done around equity, and we have put forward a number of suggestions. One we've gone into the most detail on is the in whānau that have a community services card, under 10s would swim free. We've gone into a bit more detail on that one because we think that that one strikes a good balance between achieving the purpose of what we're wanting to do, but ensuring that there is not a significant financial burden on any other pool users or on ratepayers. So we think that one strikes a good balance, but we're putting them all forward for your consideration.
Thank you, Andrea. Any questions? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do know the answer to this question, but I wanted to ask for the officer's clarification, please, for those who may be watching. Where does this sit, please, for adults with disabilities who are attending a pool for pleasure and not for learn to swim classes?
Through the Mayor. We currently do discounted for disability swimmers, and their caregivers can access for free. If you've looked at the development of the Nainai pool, you'll see that all of the service that we're doing there with the racks and the hoists and everything, it's probably going to be second to none in the area. And Hui back in its day was a pathway, a path leader for disability swimming. Sorry for the Dick Turpin look, by the way.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. I support what's proposed in terms of making entry for free for whānau with community services card, making the access free for their children, and on the understanding too that the adults will get in for free because they're supervisors. Was there any modelling done around making the pool free or discounted for adults with community services cards who don't have children under 10?
Through the Mayor. They actually have a discounted rate anyway. Sure.
There's not one listed on the pool rates on our website, which is why I was asking the question.
There is a discount, a community services card discount for Learn to Swim. No, actually,
That's
sorry,
a
might be wrong.
proposal.
Might be
That's
wrong
a
on that.
proposal,
We did some modelling around all community service card holders, and I don't think the numbers are in the paper, but the loss of revenue was very high given the number of cards there are. I think it's 17% of the community holder community services card, so the loss of revenue was quite high.
Did that modelling include whether or not those people can afford to come to our pools and are regular pool users? Is it based on pool use, or is it just based on who holds a community services card?
Just based on who holds the card. We have quite limited data about our pool users, but we've got a new system coming in end of this year that will give us much better data.
We do have a discount actually for weekly membership for community services card, but not for casual entry. But we do have discount concessions for casual entry for students and 65 plus. So if not making it free for adult holders of community services card, could we consider providing to them the same concession rate as students or as 65 plus? Would that have a big impact on revenue to give them a discount rather than make it free?
We could do some modelling on that.
What I would propose is you would see my recommendation here, which is agreeing with the option, which is under 10 swim free, where they are with an adult community services card. We could ask for the 4th of June if that modelling can come back, if we're of a mind to extend that. I think it's probably not too difficult to pull together, Andrea. Yep. Okay. So we can. I don't think we need a recommendation on that, but we can that can be one that comes back on the 4th. Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Dyer.
Yeah, just some clarity on obviously understand the children under 10 CCS entry for free. Is it supervisors that are just they're supervising, obviously not swimming, they get them for free? If they want to swim, they then pay the standard rate?
Supervisors can swim as long as they're actively supervising the children.
And if they're just out of the pool supervising, do they still would usually have to pay? Yep.
No, if they're supervising the under 10s or the under 8s at the moment, but we're going to under 10s, if they're supervising those, they don't have to be in the pool. But if they want to get in there, and we'd encourage that because it's actually engaging and teaching the children to swim anyway.
The non-CCS children, if there's an adult with them, they have to pay the supervisor rate to go and just sit and watch, or is it only if they went in? No, cool. Thank you.
Okay. No other questions? Okay. So I'll move the recommendations, which are my mayoral recommendations, and that is that one, notes officers were asked to provide options for elected members to consider would provide better equity and access to aquatic services, and 2, agrees to the proposed option of under 10 swim free where whānau have a community services card. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Mitchell. Any discussion? No, I will just say really pleased to be able to support this initiative. I think it strikes the right balance of targeting those which are more likely to have cost as a barrier for entry to our swimming facilities. And I think that it's a great opportunity in line with the new opening of Nainai Pool and potentially the barriers that would be reduced for children there as well. And certainly happy to support Councillor Mitchell's request for that further information. But yeah, I think a great way for us to be able to do this at a pretty minor cost of to the general ratepayer, rather than making it, I suppose, a blanket approach. Okay, so any other comments? Councillor Tupou, then Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I totally support this kaupapa, and I think particularly around these classes that are available for tamariki. I think swimming safety is important, and this may be the only place at our local pools where they'll pick up that learning in those schools. It certainly worked for me, Mr. Mayor, on learning how to escape from a upturned kayak, which I acquired those skills from Nainai Pool, Mr. Mayor, and they later came in handy at our Rancho camp out on the lake. So these are life-saving skills, Mr. Mayor, that our tamariki will learn during their time, and I support this kaupapa. Kia ora.
Councillor Brown. Okay, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Thank you. Okay. Now we're going to move into the public excluded part of the meeting, which is item 8. I'll move that. Do I have a seconder? Deputy Mayor Lewis, any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Okay, so we now have page 2 of the public excluded agenda,